So first up, I would like to introduce Brian Farmer, who is also a member of NY Small Farma. Brian is the Director of Certification Services for the Cannabis Conservancy, and he's part of a team that has developed regenerative production standards for the cannabis industry called Sun and Earth. Brian, welcome.
Thanks, Nicole. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad all of you could make it. When I was thinking about what I wanted to do on Earth Day, it was really to focus in on the three pieces that we were going to consider today to kind of start the conversations that we're going to have ongoing in this platform. Consciousness, cannabis, and regeneration and climate resiliency, all of those pieces. It's a huge conversation, and I feel like I'm just going to lay out a few points from my perspective, doing the work that I've been doing, developing certifications and working with growers all over the country, and as a grower myself. So the first piece, consciousness. This is where it really starts. We can't change anything unless we change our consciousness. Being aware of our impacts in the world and educating ourselves. And we feel like part of our organization's mission is really to work on that education piece. And this really, especially in this circumstance, includes how we relate to those who have been negatively impacted by the insane policies of prohibition and oppression with cannabis, but more broadly as a part of industrial, social, and economic systems, which kind of drive where we are now. And I was thinking about this today, and there's going to be a lot of tumult and turmoil with all of this. And for me, compassion for all of us is really key as we move forward with these kind of radical shifts in culture as it relates to this plant. And the plant told me to tell you that. So that's the power there. And, in the context of cannabis in our culture, we have to, understand that we live in an incredibly intense commercial culture that drives our conversations here. And we really have to consider what our impacts personally are as a part of this mix. What do we know? What don't we know? Which is, for a lot of people, a much bigger piece of this, about how the plant is grown, all of the intricacies of what an industry for cannabis means. And unless you're growing your own, there's a lot of questions about the impacts of that production. So it's important to understand how that plant changes your whole concept of your piece in the industrial commercial culture. I think it's really important to start from a place of empowerment here, because industrial culture tends to disempower people and just make them consumers. So a couple of things I was thinking of. We really have to be proactive here as things develop in what we call the industry, especially here in New York. And I would say there's a couple things you can do, but there are many. I'll mention two here. Number one, always question the motives and models of the dominant commercial culture. Brands, greenwashing, kind of the latest trend, the latest strain or cultivar, and these commercial models. Why can't we, buy cannabis along with our veggies at the farmer's market? Why is that? There are big questions here. The next thing is something that I have worked with people all over the country on as these different markets are growing, and it's trying to get people to ask these questions when they walk into their retailer of cannabis. Do you have any certified cannabis? Do you sell organic cannabis? Is this cannabis sun grown? How is it grown? Ask those questions and see what happens. That's because the choices that you are the things that impact. It's kind of like buy the change you want to see. If you want to see a certain kind of production and value in that plant, you have to drive that as a consumer, because that's a key piece of this. So that's kind of that change around your consciousness piece, and just coming to grips with how you're thinking about it. The next is cannabis. Okay. A deep, deep, deep history here, which we can't go into tonight in detail, but hopefully we will in the future. It's been grown outdoors for millennia successfully. There's thousands of cultivars globally in all types of environments, from the high Tibetan Plateau, which is where the plant originated, to the Congolese jungle. It's a strong and widely adaptable plant. It grows outside in many different environments. So it's important to understand that as a given. A really important thing I wanted to bring up here around this plant is how the preferences for what we desire as cannabis consumers has developed in the broad understanding. Historically, the preferences for cannabis have been extremely varied depending on geography, social use, whether you're using flower or the seed or the fiber. There are so many different ways the plant can be used. In our current context, it's been narrowed down to a very few kind of metrics that you're dealing with as a part of commercial culture. And it's, in many discussions, it's boiled down to that indoor-outdoor kind of conversation, which is a piece of it, and we'll get into that in further discussions. But some of those arguments are, driven by the commercial culture. The indoor-outdoor arguments are kind of shaped by decades of indoor production and cultivars that are suited to those techniques. And that's what consumers know by default. And it's the primary driver, has been, behind breeding and what you do with that. So it's tended toward high THC content and bag appeal, the way it looks. So it's limited the possibilities for thousands of cultivars out there. And the consumer is really being given limited options. So as we think about the impacts of it, we also have to think about, how the producers are thinking about what they're growing and consumer demand. Typically, you'll hear, oh, indoor is stronger, it looks better, but who decides what better is in this context? Is high THC the only metric that matters? I think that's increasingly changing, but it's been the dominant force in the industry for a long time. Typically, the arguments around outdoor are many, which our organization is really pushing, but there's much greater plant expression, terpene profiles, more nuanced kind of aspects related to the climate, the soils, all of those things. But this is a much more nuanced discussion that we're going to have in the future. So the third piece is regeneration, climate resiliency. There are many different ways of talking about this. But to put it bluntly, sun-grown is the key. And please check those links in the chat to find out about some more information related to all of this. So sun-grown is the key, but sun-grown is not always an option. Given your geographic and cultural circumstances, remember, when we talk about regenerative, it's much bigger than just agriculture. Regeneration and resiliency are not strictly about agriculture. It's about how to truly empower and enrich communities, human, animal, plant communities, and reimagining where we're going to go with that and the transitions is going to be a long conversation. So we all need to be patient with each other. I always give big respect to cultivators who were forced to grow indoors and work with the plant all these years and developed immense body of knowledge around the plant and growing in that context. But we have to understand that indoor mass production is a luxury that the planet can't afford. There's tremendous commercial pressure to maintain the current models. Folks have a lot of money invested in all of this and are really going to keep pushing for this. And it'll continue to be a driving force unless it's tempered by consumer demand for sun-grown, locally grown herb. This is critically important because the industry is not going to change until the consumer puts the pressure on there. I've learned this after years of kind of working with all of this. So this is a really good opportunity to re-examine all of these pieces of the current model and try and reimagine models that have historically worked, throw out the ones that are not going to work for us in terms of resiliency. You know, cooperative ventures among small stakeholders rather than big corporate top-down concentration of wealth type models needs to be the push. And if we can support that through our consumer choices, that's really important. Finally, if we're going to talk about these wholesale changes, we also have to talk about the structural shifts and all of those things that are going to impact the communities there. So there's going to be fallout, and there's going to be new opportunities for communities who haven't had those before. So we need to consider all of those pieces. This has to be a much larger ongoing conversation, and I look forward to it. Happy Earth Day and support your local cannabis grower. Thank you all for being here.